Hey everyone, welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into something that is just absolutely fascinating. When we usually think about trauma, we picture the loud stuff, right? The major crises, the visible scars. And here's the wild part. What if I told you that some of your most highly praised, seemingly normal daily habits are actually hidden trauma responses? We're going to break down how the brain masterfully adapts to our early emotional environments and how the things you might literally consider your best personality traits are actually survival gear you've been lugging around for decades. Okay, let's dive into this. Have you ever found yourself giving like a full 3-minute backstory for why you were just 5 minutes late? Or maybe you've caught yourself justifying to a friend why you bought a specific brand of bread, even when absolutely no one asked? On the surface, it sounds like you're just being polite, right? Or maybe just communicative or super thorough. But as we explore the source material today, we're going to see that this habit of over-explaining is actually a symptom of something so much deeper. So to really wrap our heads around these habits, we have to talk about childhood emotional neglect, or CEN for short. It's basically the absence of emotional attunement. Unlike visible trauma, where maybe there are loud arguments or really clear boundaries being crossed, CEN is, well, it's an invisible wound. It's defined entirely by what didn't happen. It's that empty space where a parent's curiosity, their validation, and their comfort absolutely should have been. And because it's invisible, kids growing up in these environments don't even realize anything is wrong. They just adapt. All right, moving on to Section 1, the Fortress of Independence, when strength is a survival strategy. This is where we start seeing how these survival strategies get completely mistaken for incredibly strong personality traits. Just look at this contrast. Society calls this kind of behavior resilience and high competence. You're the person who flat out refuses help. You figure out that complicated software at work all by yourself without ever calling IT. Or you manage a devastating personal crisis without ever picking up the phone to call a friend. But psychology calls this a counterdependency trauma response. Think about it. If you reached out for help as a kid and consistently hit a brick wall of indifference or irritation, your brain did some radical math. It learned that asking for help is a risk that leads straight to rejection. So you had to become your own source for everything. You aren't just being hyper-productive here, you're actually protecting yourself from the crushing pain of having your needs unmet. Now, what's really wild is how that extreme independence morphs into a very specific relationship dynamic. It's called the service-based worth trap. Basically, you become the person who fixes everyone else's life. You're the classic therapist friend, right? You're always staying late to help colleagues out. Why do we do this? Well, a child in a neglectful home often learns that their only real value to unstable or overwhelmed parents is just being useful. And because of that, receiving care as an adult feels incredibly dangerous. It feels like a trap or like you owe this massive debt. So you end up stuck in these totally one-way friendships where you give endlessly but completely disappear the second you have a crisis of your own. Which brings us right to the core philosophy of this behavior. Look at this powerful quote. "If I don't need you, you can't hurt me by leaving or failing me." Man, that is the tragic cost of this fortress of independence. Yes, deleting the ask for help button from your internal operating system absolutely keeps you safe from being let down. It works, but it also creates this profound echoing loneliness. Because true intimacy literally requires the risk of reliance. If you can't rely on someone, you just can't truly connect with them. That brings us to Section 2, the shrinking self, the burden of taking up space. And this brilliantly illustrates the flip side of the coin. We're moving from how people push the world away with independence to how they try to physically and emotionally minimize their own existence around others. Here are a few daily manifestations of that shrinking. First up, the apology reflex. You know the one, saying I'm sorry when someone bumps into you at the grocery store, or apologizing for your house being messy when there is literally one single book out of place. It's apologizing for simply taking up space in someone's field of vision. Then there's conflict avoidance, where you just swallow your anger to keep the peace, and of course, over-explaining, which we touched on earlier. All of these, they're preemptive strikes. You're basically building a bulletproof case for your everyday choices just to avoid being dismissed by a neglectful ghost from your past. Let's see how this builds our understanding of conflict avoidance, because the contrast here is pretty stark. To others, your silence means peace. They look at you and think you're just chill or super easygoing. But to you, silence means abandonment. You might be an absolute master at avoiding conflict, totally terrified of any disagreement, because in a neglectful home, any ripple in the water could lead to a total withdrawal of whatever tiny crumbs of affection were actually available. You aren't keeping the peace because you just love harmony. You're doing it out of a deep, deep terror of the silence that follows. All right, section 3, the lost internal compass. Disconnecting from the gut. So, in a healthy childhood, parents act as emotional mirrors. They validate and label a child's feelings. But when a child's emotions are treated as invisible, or even worse, as an inconvenience, this profound internal disconnect happens. Suddenly, someone asks how you feel, and your mind just goes completely blank. In psychology, a degree of this is actually called alexithymia. It's the inability to identify your feelings. You basically learn to mute your inner world super early on because feeling those emotions was, well, useless. There was no one there to help you process them. As an adult, this creates a sort of flat emotional life. You might feel like you're just observing the world through a thick pane of glass, wondering why everyone else seems so much more connected to their passions. Which leads us to a truly haunting question. Who am I when no one is watching? This introduces what we call the social chameleon effect. You might be incredibly good at reading a room, instantly adapting your tone, your personality, and even your opinions to perfectly match whoever you're with. On the surface, that looks like super high emotional intelligence, but for those who experienced neglect, it was actually a hyper-vigilant survival tactic. You had to constantly monitor your parents' moods just to ensure your own safety. You became a mirror because you literally weren't allowed to have a solid core identity of your own. We see this fractured identity play out in what we call the broken compass. It shows up as chronic indecisiveness, agonizing over simple dinner plans or movie choices. It's the habit of the second guess, this constant exhausting internal dialogue of doubt about every small decision, and it originates from gaslighting by omission. Think about it. When you said, "I'm sad," as a kid, and a parent responded with, "No, you're not, you're just tired," or they completely ignored you, you lost trust in your own perception of the world. Decades of having your preferences ignored basically severs your connection to your gut. You bury your true desires so deep just to stay safe that eventually you can no longer find them. Let's move to our final part, Section 4, shedding your armor. It is safe to take it off. So the crucial point is this. If you recognize yourself in any of these habits, the hyper-independence, the constant apologizing, the emotional numbing, the absolute most important takeaway from this explainer is that there is absolutely nothing wrong with you. Seriously, your brain did exactly what it was supposed to do to adapt to an environment of emotional scarcity. But the survival gear you've been wearing is now becoming way too heavy. These habits are your armor, and you can genuinely thank that armor for getting you this far. I mean, it literally saved your emotional life. But you are no longer that helpless child, and your environment has changed. Now that armor is just chafing, and it's actively preventing you from experiencing the very love and connection you have always craved. Healing from this isn't about fixing a broken version of yourself. It's about repairing the part of you that got left behind. And it starts with small, almost invisible, actionable steps. Step 1, state a preference. Instead of saying, "Oh, I don't care," say, "I'd prefer the Italian place." Step 2, pause. Wait just 5 seconds before saying, "I'm sorry," if you haven't actually done anything wrong. Just let that awkward silence sit there. And step 3, accept help. Allow someone to help you carry a heavy box, even if you can completely do it yourself. These are tiny acts, but they begin to really validate your own needs. I want to leave you with this incredibly powerful thought to conclude our explainer today. You are never too much. You are simply a child who deserved to be noticed. Your needs are not an imposition on the world. To the people who truly belong in your life, your needs are actually an opportunity for them to show up and love you. You are allowed to take the armor off. You are allowed to be seen. So what is one small way you can let yourself be noticed today?